Out of the Picture by Arthur Machen. Chapter 1. In the old days, which means anything from 10 to 30 years ago, there was a question which used to be asked now and then at studio parties and Chelsea pubs. The question was, but who was the twisted man? And it was often followed by another. But where did McCalmont take himself off to? Neither interrogation ever got an answer, save that to the second query, a young man in very full dark green corduroy trousers is reported to have said once on a time, "Somebody told me he had been seen in Quito." But to this neither credit nor attention was given, and it is probable from what follows that the double enigma is to be reckoned with that question as to what song the sirens sang, if indeed it is not past all solution. Going back, then, to those old days aforesaid, and rather to the earlier portion of them, when, as a journalist, I saw many strange things and people, I was once sent to view an exhibition of pictures at the Molyneux Galleries in Danby Place. Perhaps the event may be sufficiently dated by saying that the exhibition was opened somewhere between the Battle of Sidney Street and the coronation of King George V, and I have a feeling that it was a misty May morning when I went to see it. It was not a large exhibition. All the pictures were contained in 2 sizable rooms, and as soon as I got into them, I saw at once that I could make nothing of it, that is, from any serious standpoint. I cared nothing. My point of view in that instance, as in all others like it, was that if the paper chose to send an outsider and an ignoramus to criticize works of art, especially the works of a new and tentative and experimental school, then on the head of the paper let the just doom fall. And the school represented on this particular occasion at the Molyneux Galleries evidently represented a fierce revolt against the traditions and conventions of the elders. To begin with, my eye was caught by the Old Harbour. There were buildings in vertical perspective, their walls appearing to incline together and to aspire to meet in the upper part of the canvas, and with a sense about them as if the whole mass were unstable, impermanent, void of true solidity and settlement on the earth. A mystic once told me that after he had finished his meditation and gone out into the street, he had seen the grey bulk of the houses opposite suddenly melt, evaporate, go up like smoke, leaving void nothingness in their place. And so the painter, with his art, had made these warehouses and customs buildings, or whatever they were, in such a fashion that they seemed as if they also were on the very point to turn to mist, to float into the air, and to disappear. And then, for the rest, there was grey water, and segments, and portions, and particles of keels, sails, masts, ropes, decks, and deck furniture, not cohering or fitting together, but dispersed and apart. Here, I could see, was choice matter on which the expert and art critic could exercise their knowledge and judgment. As I had neither, I made an experiment or two, and was able to inform the readers of the paper that if you walked briskly past the picture, winking both eyes as fast as possible, you really got a sort of impression of movement and activity, of ships and boats coming into harbor and sailing out of it, of sails lowered and hoisted, of an uncertain background, now obscured, now left visible, as a ship in full sail passed before it. It struck me that, in my hands, art criticism was, in a fair way, to become a popular sport. And then there was another picture that both attracted and distracted me. It was a big canvas, and the subject was a number of geometrical figures of all kinds, most ingeniously fitted into one another, and rainbow painted, no doubt on some occult principle of contrast and complement and correspondence. It was called King Solomon's Cargoes. I murmured, "Gold and silver and ivory and apes and peacocks," and looked for them. I could not see any of them, and I thought I would go back to Fleet Street, relying on my impressions of the Old Harbour, which would just fill the 2 sticks that had been allotted to the story. It was, decidedly, a case of least said, soonest mended. In spite of the defense which, as I have mentioned, I had ready, I felt I was on unsafe and treacherous ground. Who was I to sit in judgment on the work of painters? No doubt I might say that I had looked for apes and peacocks in that picture and had found none. And, likely enough, that remark might merely serve to display my utter ignorance of the subject I was pretending to treat. But it was not written that I should escape King Solomon's cargoes so easily. It was some years after the exhibition at the Molyneux Galleries that I found myself in a various company one evening. I saw a few people that I knew, and was talking to one of them, when the friend who had brought me along came and said, "Do you mind if I introduce you to a man? It's McCalmont, the painter, who says he's been wanting to meet you for years. Some criticism of yours that he read seems to have made a great impression on him." He took me up to a dark, slight man with a black mustache, and left me. McCalmont made room on the settee and began at once. "I've been wanting to thank you for a long time for that notice you wrote in your paper about the exhibition in the Molyneux Galleries. You'll remember, it was in the coronation year." I told him I thought I did remember something about it, but I wondered, internally, what sort of thanks I was going to get from a painter for my vain ribaldry. He went on, "I said to myself at the time, this A.M., whoever he may be, has got an eye to detect the falsities and fallacies, and I'd like to have a talk with him. Then somebody told me your name, but I left town soon after, and this is the first chance I've had." And finally it came to this, that the falsities and fallacies were the picture of The Old Harbour by Frank Guilford, and McCalmont had enjoyed the way I had stuck my knife into the fellow. I explained. I said I knew nothing about painting, and had been afraid that I had been guilty of ill-placed and unmannerly humour. He wouldn't hear of this. "It was just instinct, pure instinct. You may not have the technical knowledge, but you know a silly man when you see him." I asked what had become of this unhappy man. "He's what they call a fashionable painter, and makes his 8,000 a year by painting grocers and their wives. Damn him." And he went on, "I don't know whether you happened to see a thing I had in that exhibition. I called it King Solomon's Cargoes." I lied. I dwelt again, and more forcibly, on the utter unscrupulousness of my character when simulating an art critic. I said I had not seen his canvas. I had just dashed into the galleries, invented my silly game with the ships in the harbour, and ran out again as soon as I had got material for my 2 or 3 paragraphs. But, in fact, I remembered those purple squares, scarlet triangles, sky-blue circles very well. McCalmont nodded his head gloomily. "I'm glad it didn't catch your eye. You might have had something to say to me, too. You'd have been right, and you'd have been wrong. I was never a faker like Guildford. I never pretended that if you painted a bit of mast here and a scrap of sail there and a deck in another part of the canvas, you could call it painting a ship. But I did believe in abstract painting, and I still do, in a way." I asked him to tell me all about it. "I'd like to explain what I was after in those days. You say you know nothing about the technical side of painting. You won't want to know anything about it. It's not a technical question. It's behind all that and beyond it. But you can't talk sense in the middle of all these havers. Come away." I followed him out, and by devious and obscure ways he led me to an obscure tavern, where we sat down together in a quiet corner of a bulging and old-fashioned bar. They spoke his language there, since his order for 2 wee halfins was fulfilled without comment. But I looked at the stuff in my glass, and remembered how the poet had said that the half is greater than the whole. Greater, I corrected mentally, than the double. I added water. "Don't kill good drink," McCalmont said reproachfully. "Scelus est jugulare falernum." And this is better. It's the genuine Lagavulin, not the trash they sell in London for whiskey. But you were asking about abstract painting. It will be necessary to go back and away a little if we're to see what we're after. They say distance lends enchantment to a view. I'd put it myself, lends vision, Theoria. It may turn out, of course, that when you do see, you see enchantment, but that is just secondary, a kind of byproduct, you might say, of the proposition. I'll ask you then if you know anything about the Kabbalah of the Hebrews. Whatever I knew of that matter, I dissembled. I am a lover of the rich improbabilities, and I would not check this rare manifestation of them. Well, I don't want you to feel like a cow in a fremd loaming, so I won't go too deeply into these dark mysteries. But the Kabbalists tell us that at the fall of man, the serpent did not ascend to Kether in the tree of life. It stopped at Doth, and that's their way of saying the nature of man was not entirely corrupted. The serpent poisoned and infected the logical understanding, but there was a pure spiritual region above that which remained untouched. Very good, you see that, and there you have the reason why a man that sunk deep in the blackest mud of materialism may very possibly be overcome with delight at the fugues of Bach. You'll see how that may be. That's absolute music. It has nothing to do with Doth, the logical understanding. I'm speaking, you understand, of the pattern of sounds that reaches the ears of the hearer. Just the ordered noises that he hears, if you like to put it that way. In the making of the music, no doubt, in the technical part of the creation, the understanding had its share, as the slave of the spirit. If you want to build Jerusalem with its temple, you must have your hewers of wood and stone and drawers of water. You're a writer yourself, and you know you can't do much in that way without calling in the aid of the pen makers and the ink manufacturers and paper merchants. But you don't allow them to teach you how to turn the phrase. But the way the thing is fashioned is nothing to do with us. What we're concerned with is the thing we hear. And with that thing, the logical understanding has just no concern at all. You'll note there's no tongue or language in which we can speak of it. There's no answer to the question, but what does it mean? When that question is asked of pure music. Bach, you may say, had the gift of tongues, but in his case there's no legitimate gift of the interpretation of tongues. It's impossible to translate the language of Kether into the speech of Doth. I remember well going to hear Lohengrin, and there was a manner of commentary attached to the bill of the opera. I just glanced at it, and saw that when the overture began, I was to picture to myself a blue sky, and then to watch the wee white clouds forming on it. There you have your music critic calling in nature, and I saw in the paper there was another of them puzzling his head over Berlioz, and decided that he was a pictorial, not a linear, composer, calling in the terms of another art. And you'll hear often enough of the magnificent color of this or that passage of music. And I don't say they can do better, but it proves what I am telling you, that the understanding has nothing to do with absolute music, and nothing to say to it. Aye, and what about painting? That's the question I asked myself years ago. You know Aristotle says that all art is imitation. It's a very questionable pronouncement. If I'm not mistaken, he had the drama chiefly in his mind when he made it. But the drama is just an impure or mixed development of the dance. In its primitive, original form, the dance was not an imitation of anything. It was, like music, an expression of something, but that's different. You may say that the drama of the Greeks was the dance set to words. And then there's architecture. You can't say that the Parthenon is an imitation of anything, or that Rheims Cathedral is an imitation of anything. And literature, I shan't need to tell you that all the things we value most in the finest literature are just the things that soar above the sense, that is, the logical understanding of it. If you turn to the book and read 2 Samuel 1:17, you'll find a statement to the effect that David lamented the decease of Saul and Jonathan. But you'll not tell me that the vital interest and value of that proposition is to be discovered in the logical sense of it. And if you read Coleridge's Kubla Khan, I think you'll be puzzled to find out the logical sense in it, and to tell me what it is. But there you have literature almost becoming music. And now you see what I've been getting at all the while. I did not, but I forbore to say so. It was just this, that I asked myself, why should there not be abstract or absolute painting, as well as absolute music and architecture? In the past, painting has been almost entirely Aristotelian, imitative. Why should it continue wholly on those lines? And you'll have gathered that I don't consider you solved the problem by cracking an object up into bits and scraps and pieces, and then painting the bits as they lie abroad. And if you paint a man's hands 3 times their natural size, and draw a jackass with 5 legs, I'm not thinking you're any nearer to a solution. And that's how I came to paint the picture that I sent into those galleries that I'm glad now you didn't see. I was on the wrong track. He lapsed at last into silence. I broke it by making a proposition remote from pure aesthetics. He declined to accede to it. No, no, said McCalmont, I'll not hear of it. In the Crown and Thistle, I'm in Scotland, and you're my guest. Where's the McFarlane creature? When we parted soon after, he wrote his address on a scrap of paper torn from his notebook, and begged me to come and see him one evening. I'd like to show you the new track I've found, he said, and vanished into the night as we came out together.